There is a new political party on the scene today. It's called the Freedom Alliance Party, and it's been with us around about 18 months or so. Joining me to discuss this party, the context in which it has emerged, some of its guiding principles, and indeed its ultimate goals, is its current leader, Jonathon Tilt. Jonathon, thank you for taking the time to join me today, and welcome.
Thanks very much, and thanks for having me on. It's always a pleasure to do podcasts like this and to get the word out about our party. I mean, you're right. We are, in broad scheme of things, a new party. Probably most people listening to this won't have heard about us because we are blocked and restricted and corralled into a little corner certainly by the mainstream media. But the alternative media isn't that much better. Anyway, I mean, we were set up in the summer of 2020, really by people that had no previous involvement or any great interest in politics, but wanted to resist the encroaching tyranny and what was happening. People could see through what was happening, and just wanted to use the political system as one of the avenues available to us to resist. It's not the be all and end all. I think it is possibly going to be left as the last man standing, the only thing that we've got left to try and fight the tyranny with. We were set up really by two groups that sort of came together in the early days. A group around me in West Yorkshire, Huddersfield, Wakefield area, and a group in Glasgow. The pair of us came together rather than set up two separate parties. We thought we'd set up one. Went through all the aggravation of registering with the Electoral Commission, etc. Set up a website and started to pull in members from across the country. Really, I mean, we do continue to have a sort of something of a focus in those two areas, Yorkshire and the west of Scotland, but we have candidates across the country. We've had 200 people, more than 200 people stand for a range of elections for us, ranging from parliamentary by-elections, Scottish and Welsh national elections, and English council elections. We've got a candidate in the upcoming Chester by-election on the 1st of December. We've just secured somebody to stand for us there. And we're just using the electoral system to partly to publicise what we think is going on, because it is a great opportunity to get your word out there and to get out of your echo chambers and engage with the wider population. And partly just to try and provide some sort of pushback against what's going on, and that's what we do. We're all volunteers. Nobody's paid. Nobody's making any money out of it. It's just a bunch of volunteers trying to do the best we can with very limited resources. Yeah,
it's great to see such a party emerging. I mean, many of us within the thinking community have mixed feelings about government and the effectiveness of parties, but I think it's a worthy component to the overall strategy, and it's great to see people standing up for what they believe in and actually doing something. So when did you say the party began? What, 18 months ago? Did it?
Well, it's summer of 2020. We sort of started to. I mean, I was involved in the various sort of underground resistance groups who were meeting in the woods and all these sort of things that it seems quite bizarre now. But I mean, that was special knocks on doors and stuff like this that was going on in the summer of 2020, basically.
Yeah.
That was the sort of genesis of the party. That summer of 2020, and obviously it took a time to come together and to get all the paperwork done for the Electoral Commission. We were registered as a party in March 21. First big set of elections was May 21, where we did have 160 candidates of those. I think. I mean, that was a massive effort. And we've kept going from then. It's been up and down. We tend to get more interested in us when things are a bit rocky. So when the COVID restrictions, every time they got brought back in, we would have a flood of members, and every time foot was taken off the pedal and things relaxed a bit, people would lose interest in us. So we've had that little sort of theme. But I mean, we see this as now as part of a long-term digital enslavement agenda. I mean, COVID was just the opening battle, a battle that we may possibly have won. I mean, certainly ground into a stalemate. I think. I mean, they didn't expect the resistance on the vaccines to be what it was. I mean, I think I don't know. I mean, you can have a range of theories, but I think they wanted to morph from everybody having the vaccine into vaccine cards and then digital ID and the social credit scoring and all the rest of it. I mean, for me, that actually is one of the most optimistic things, because it shows the stupidity of our enemies. Because they, to pick vaccines as a battleground was foolish on their part, I think, because MMR statistics show that there's about 15% of people that don't get their kids vaccinated. So a very quick look at the stats would show you that there's a healthy chunk of the population that are not big fans of vaccines. So to pick vaccines as your battleground was
It
with
could
arrogant, really, probably. I mean, which is what you get
true.
with, yeah,
But it could be argued that it's a sort of a dry run, isn't it? It's a tester, because I mean, unfortunately, we have a pandemic treaty being drawn up
yeah, I know.
by the by bodies way beyond any political accountability, and the goal of the pandemic treaty, I believe, is to attempt to further streamline and coordinate and enforce a response to the next pandemic, and that is a little troubling to some of us. But nevertheless, I mean, it's good to see people rallying around a central issue where obviously common sense is able to, with a modicum of thinking, of course, is able to penetrate the ludicrous policies, which I mean, are your members and your leadership, are they fairly convinced of the facts that show that a lot of these policies are scientifically ungrounded, basically, although they, of course, claimed to be scientific. They're in fact nonsense, aren't they? For example, you wouldn't keep mosquitoes out of a tennis court with that sort of 2.5-inch fencing around an average tennis court. You wouldn't use that kind of fencing to block that kind of size creature. And it's been said that similarly with viruses and masks, you can make the same sort of analogy. So, is your leadership, are you relatively united behind the belief that these measures were in fact deliberate and knowingly unfounded? Is that fair
Yes,
to say?
no, I mean, absolutely. I mean, masks are just a compliance signal, aren't they? But for me, again, that's part. Yeah, I always take a slightly more optimistic stance on this, but I think if we can get 15% of the population resisting whatever they try to do, then that's too many for them. The vaccine, if you look at the ONS and surveillance reports, vaccine uptake is, there were 15% that didn't get any vaccines. The mask compliance, every time, that was withdrawn every time 15% of people in the supermarket stopped wearing masks, and they are obviously nonsensical and ridiculous, as you demonstrate. And the absurd seal-like North Korean clapping that we had right at the start, that was knocked on the head after 10 weeks when 15% of people stopped doing it. And that, for me, is where politics comes in. If we can get 15% of the electorate to start voting for genuine, non-globalist, non-WEF candidates, and that may not necessarily always be Freedom Alliance, then I think we'll stop them in their tracks. So I think, getting this 15%, we don't have to convince everybody. There are still people driving around in masks in their cars, and they're lost to us. There's no point even engaging with them. But we've
Indeed.
got to get that 15% that actually get it to stand firm. And politics is one way of standing firm, and politics is also a way of making statements like the one you made about the masks. We can, when the Chester by-election comes up, I don't know if we'll focus on this or not, but we can stick that on a leaflet and it gets free delivery to every household in Chester, and we can say masks are nonsense, and nobody can stop us saying that. It's under electoral law. So yeah, I mean, the party's completely united. I mean, I can't speak for every single one of our members who's joined us, obviously, but the party's united in seeing it as sinister. I think sometimes we get bogged down a little bit too much in trying to work out exactly what the other side are doing and what their plan is and what they're coming with next. For me, the whole thing is sinister and deliberate, and really, that at the end of the day is all you need to know. You need to focus on what you're going to do about it, rather than
indeed. So is
all
that
again.
really your focus of your purpose to try and give some voice to all of us, because I'm one of them as well, that sees this whole nonsense as a political tool, effectively. I feel concerned about quarantine camps and quarantine zones. Ultimately, if we were to continue this idea that public health needs to be managed along the lines that it was in the recent alleged pandemic, then that opens the door to, forcefully moving people out of their homes, ultimately to potentially create quarantine zones in between infected areas. This is very, very obviously a potential political tool, and that's one of the things that concerns me. Do you think that with enough votes, or a certain percentage of votes, and I'm curious as to what you think that might be, we managed to actually get a foot in the door into the mainstream media in order to try and get these sorts of ideas and messages to a broader audience? What sort of percentage of votes do you think is required?
Yes, I do think that's it's really our strategy and our tactics. I mean, it would be great to have people elected, but that isn't that isn't the primary aim. We're not trying to form a government here. We are trying to use the system to
Yeah.
oppose the system. I think it's 15%. I genuinely do. I think as I said before, every time you get 15% resisting whatever they do, they back off. And I think if we get 15%, bear in mind, council elections, only 30% of the population actually turn up to vote in the first place anyway. So it's, if we got everybody that's on our side to go and vote, we would win council elections. And as I say, that's not particularly the objective. Although taking council seats might be quite interesting, because a lot of the councils act as the petty enforcers for a lot of this nonsense.
It would get the debate in at the council level, wouldn't it?
Yeah. So being able to influence that would be helpful. But yes, I personally think maybe 12%, maybe 16%. I haven't done any detailed statistical analysis, but I think it's in there. It's in those mid-teens, basically. If you get those sort of numbers resisting and voting against WEF candidates is one way of resisting, then I think they back off. I mean, it's a long battle. But I am fundamentally positive, and I think quarantine camps and the rest of it is terrifying. I don't disagree with that, but I think we also have to be aware that they use fear as a weapon. I mean, for me, that is the one thing, the sort of golden thread that runs through the whole damn thing, is this use of fear.
True.
I mean, they terrified the other side with the virus, and they terrified us with the vaccine, didn't they? That's what they do. It's fear.
Absolutely.
And we have to not play into their hands there. We have to,
Agreed.
a little bit more on the front foot, I think.
Yeah, I think it's very important to distinguish which fears are genuine and which aren't. And I personally have seen plenty of evidence, and indeed lack of evidence in some areas, to show that the whole idea of a pandemic is actually not a non-legitimate fear. It's not something one needs to be afraid of. You could make a sound case for the fact that you should be much more afraid of your conventional doctor, and indeed any of these experimental medical treatments. But I think we have to be careful with sort of resisting the concept of fear, because the idea of a tyrannical state, the idea of totalitarianism, is well worth fearing, and we should.
I don't dispute with that. But what I want people to do is to use the fear to inspire action. Really,
absolutely.
If we sit at home, if we sit in our little social media echo chambers, all seeing who can scare everybody else the most, then we are playing into their hands. That's exactly where they want us, and that's what they want us doing. Which is why they haven't cleared us all off Facebook and Twitter and the rest of it. They've left us in there talking amongst ourselves, and you see it every day. I mean, I was on Facebook for 10 minutes this morning. You see it, who can terrify everybody else the most, and you are doing their work for them when you do that. So yes, I mean, quarantine camps are to be feared. They would love to have them, but that doesn't mean they're going to get them. We have to get out of this.
That's a worst case scenario.
We get out of this victim mentality. They're doing stuff to us all the time, and start getting on the front foot of it. We've got numbers here. The tide's turning, and we need to push back against them. And as I say, elections are just one small way of doing that, but they are a potentially powerful way of doing that. And we need to. We're in a much better position than we were in the summer of 2020. We were completely disorganised, rabbits caught in the headlights, and didn't know which way to turn. Hadn't found our little groups. I know we are extremely well organised. I don't mean particularly Freedom Alliance, although I'd like to think Freedom Alliance is well organised, but I mean the freedom community in general. We've got all these vast networks and people and connections across the country that are ready to go when they come with the next bit of nonsense, which may not be a pandemic. I mean, they may go full on with the climate change nonsense or whatever, or something we haven't even thought of. But whatever they come at us with next, we're organised, we're ready for it, and we've got to be more on the front foot and get out of this victim mentality. I think because
absolutely. Have some of the results in the polls given optimism for you reaching this 15% or thereabouts figure?
No is the blunt answer to that.
But it's a start.
It's a start, and we've got better at the elections process. We are getting more and more votes. I mean, some of the local council elections, we've been up at the sort of 7-8% level. Rochdale, Lincolnshire, some of the Devon places. Our biggest problem is that our support is concentrated in the non-voters. I mean, there's no point disguising that. As I say, council elections, 70% of people don't vote, and they're not voting because they haven't got anybody to vote for. They're not even aware of us. And we're not going to, with a few small exceptions, we're not going to persuade dyed-in-the-wool Tory and Labour supporters to come out and vote for us. What we've got to do is to sort of drive into that 70%, and even a general election, it's still about 40% that don't vote. So we've got to get those people interested and excited. I mean, the model for me, where I don't know where you are on the EU, on the Leave Remain side of the fence, but
Leave, yeah.
Well, I mean, most of us are, but I wouldn't. Don't mind if you were. I mean, that seems all rather trivial and irrelevant now in some respects in comparison to what we've been through since.
I'm all for independence. I'm all for independence.
But I mean, the point is,
Individualism.
UKIP terrified the Tories into having that referendum, and they never got more than about 12 or 13% in the general election. They only ever got one MP elected in the general election. They stood 600 candidates in 2015 and got one elected. So they never really achieved very much in broad electoral terms. But they got what they wanted. They got us out of the EU. We can debate whether we really are out or not. But they got the referendum, and they got it by terrifying the Tories because they were getting 15% of the vote again. It does keep coming back to that 15% number. And then when they got the referendum, they managed to get some of that 40% that never vote excited enough to go and vote. Largely because they were voting for an issue, not a person.
Yes.
And as a party, we're very much in favour of referenda.
Yeah.
But that for me is the model to try and do what UKIP did, terrify the mainstream parties into giving you what you want, and give the population, the non-voting population, something to actually, we'll turn out and vote this time.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, the level of I've stood on street corners up and down the country in various elections and by-elections, and each time I do this, I have at least one person come up to me saying, "I'm so glad you're standing. I'm desperate to vote, not for me, but for the individual who's standing. I'm desperate to vote for you." And these are often people in their 40s and 50s. But can you tell me how to vote? Where do I go? What do I do? Even which website do I go on to do this voting? So there's a big chunk of the population that actually just don't know how. They've never done it.
There's a hill to climb in more ways than one.
They don't know what to do, and they're our people. That's the people we're trying to represent and speak to. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, it's good to be realistic from the outset with one's goals, and it's refreshing to hear you're being fairly candid about that, and acknowledging that there is a role to be played, a strategic role, you could say, within the existing political system, as imperfect as it is. And there are a great many people, of course, that would argue that freedom lies entirely outside of the existing political framework. But nevertheless, I do think there's great validity here in using this tool of the Freedom Alliance Party to try and raise the profile of a key issue, because it is a key issue, isn't it? It's really where push comes to shove, and where the individual begins to be sacrificed to the state and its policies, isn't it? Well, what's your thinking on individualism? Are you a champion of that? And of course, we're talking in a context where you're not setting out to run the country and be a government. We get that, but just curious about your views.
Well, I suppose I sign up to the old libertarian. I mean, we're not the party political philosophers. We're pragmatists that are trying to use the system to resist tyranny. I mean, I sign up to the old libertarian concept. My rights finish where yours start, sort of thing. I am free to do whatever I want to do as long as I cause no harm to another individual. So that I suppose is my fundamental underlying political philosophy. I mean, I'm not an anarchist. That will probably move closer and closer to anarchism by the day, if I'm honest. I'm not a fan of representative democracy. Don't get me wrong. I'm not a big fan of or any sort of fan of the current system, but it isn't going to dissolve itself. The only way it's going to be dissolved is from within. It's not going to suddenly. They're not going to suddenly. The existing MPs aren't going to vote themselves out of jobs all of a sudden. So you have to attack it from within, which is what we're trying to do.
Absolutely.
I believe in a degree of collectivism, and we are a social species, and we work well together and work better together. But that has to be done on a free consent basis. It's not
non-coercion, really.
Non-coercion, yeah. Truth is probably the greater concept that underpins a lot of this. I mean, you could say, I'm free to do what I want as long as I don't harm anybody else. Well, others would have argued during the pandemic, walking around without a mask, I was harming people. I obviously wasn't, but they would have argued that.
Yeah.
And that's where the media comes. The media is the absolutely key part of this, and the way they've captured and controlled that is the essence of the whole thing, really, because they've obviously been able to feed people with false propaganda that wearing a mask is a kind thing to do because you're preventing other people from getting ill. It's absolute nonsense, as you say.
Yeah.
But until you can get your message out into the media, and again, that's where elections do come in, because during an election period, they do have to give us a little bit of a media attention. We can put the leaflets through the doors and all the rest of it, so we do get a bit more media coverage in an election window than we do the rest of the time. But that sort of truth running through the heart of it is the key thing. And the way the government deliberately captured the media in sort of 2018-19 prior to the pandemic, and obviously knowing that the pandemic, probably obviously knowing that this lot was coming. I mean, the BBC's obviously captured anyway with the license fee. But all the mainstream newspapers are now entirely dependent on government advertising. That's what keeps them afloat. It may not be related to health. It may be advertising to go and get your MOT or something. But all those newspapers knew that if the government withdrew its advertising, they would be finished in a matter of days. And that's not a free and fair and objective press, is it? And that's what we need to get back to. So one thing we would abolish the BBC license fee, obviously, but more wider than that, we would ban government advertising in any newspaper. So newspapers aren't funded by the government, which is that's where we're at the minute, and it goes wider than that. It's Sky Television and the rest of it runs adverts that are paid for by the government, by the state, and therefore is more receptive to pushing the state's propaganda.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because you say the answer sort of has got to come from the grassroots or from within, as you the term you used. You could say that's analogous to grassroots. It really needs to come from the people, doesn't it? It's very well, it's impossible to impose freedom. You can't decree freedom upon the land. But it ties in with this issue of truth, doesn't it? Because every individual has to trouble themselves to discern the truth. And if we rely on, switching on the 6 o'clock news to hear the truth, that is the problem. That therein lies the root cause of people not knowing what's real, because they've already, given up their own independent critical thinking, and they're sort of delegating the task of finding out what's true to their favorite media source. And it's a sort of a chicken and egg situation here. We require people to know the truth that vaccines can only harm you. Let's go as far as to say that there isn't any actual isolated evidence. There's no evidence for the existence of viruses or contagion. We could go to these fundamentals, and of course everyone could avail themselves to these facts. Everyone is at liberty to do their own finding out and fire up their own curiosity. So we're in a difficult predicament, aren't we, Jonathan, in trying to counter arguments such as you mentioned about how dangerous a person is being if they don't wear a mask, which is simply not true. And yet we have to counter the propaganda with truth, and yet truth can only really be found by that individual if they're curious. There's no way to persuade somebody of the opposite idea if they wish to cling to a false idea. I mean, that just isn't going to happen, and you can't legislate it. You can't force them to. What do you? I
totally agree. I mean, again, I would make the emphasis that elections does give us a little chink in a window in there to try and do that. The Scottish and Welsh Parliament elections back in May 21, we had a party political broadcast on both Scottish and Welsh television. We probably weren't at that point in time professional and proficient enough to know exactly how to use them to our best advantage. But you do get that legal right to go on the telly and tell people truth if you stand enough candidates. So there are little chinks like that. But we it's back to the point that we are not trying to persuade the whole population here. We're trying to get the 15% who do get it, who don't watch the telly, who do independent research, to take some action. That's what we need to do. In the party, we've always talked about there being three camps, really. Our camp that somewhere between 10 and 20% who get it. The hardline masketeers at the other end, the sort of 20% who are driving around with masks on in their cars, who definitely don't get it and never will. And then that vast chunk in the middle, who, a lot of whom smell a rat and will accept that it doesn't quite add up, but won't go all the way. And we just need to get a few of them to come across to us and then to take action. And action is primarily mass non-compliance. Just don't do whatever nonsense they come out with. If you live in Oxford and they say they're going to fine you if you drive more than 15 minutes away, well, then drive 15 minutes away and see if they fine you, and then challenge the fine when they do fine you. So we need that mass non-compliance, and we need people voting for us. Those for me are the two key weapons, really. And voting really just acts as a support to the mass non-compliance. It's a way of publicising, organising, structuring things,
and legitimising it, I guess you could say.
Yeah. But it's mass non-compliance is how we win this. For me, it's just do not do whatever. We don't know what they're going to come out with next, do we? It could be something we haven't even thought of.
No.
But we know there will be more nonsense coming, and just do not comply, because they can't. They haven't got the facility, the infrastructure. They rely on this being voluntarily enforced.
Yeah. What about things like our allegiance to the WHO, World Health Authority, organization? I beg your pardon, not authority. Would you like to see us sort of tearing up the signing up to that nonsense?
Our party policy is to be out of all non-democratic supranational bodies, which is obviously the WHO, but is also the UN, it's NATO, the IMF, the whole lot we would come out of. They have no role. They're globalist cabals that are just enforcing the globalist agenda. I mean, in terms of what you talked about earlier about trying to we can't change the mass of the population. For me, I mean, we've had probably centuries, but certainly 40 or 50 years of sort of erosions of civil liberties and erosions of freedom alongside an ever bigger and more powerful state. And what we're trying to do, what we're at now, is we're trying to turn that super tank around very slowly, turn it around, and then go back towards having slightly smaller government year after year after year and slightly more freedom. We're not going to go suddenly from what we've got now to the sort of utopia that you and I probably have got in our minds. But if we turn that super tank around and start pushing back, and the thing to remember with all of this is that they've managed to achieve that through their monetary system, basically through debt-based slavery. That's how they control us at the minute. The creation of ever more money, which the government gets to use first and hands out to its favoured people. That system's coming to an end because it will collapse under inflation, as all empires ultimately do. All debt-based empires, which is pretty much every empire there's ever been, has collapsed under inflation, and that's what's happening now. And they're panicking. They're trying to put in place this new slavery system, this digital slavery system, which I don't think they're ready for it. I think this is all coming 10 years too soon for them. But they know that hyperinflation is going to come and is going to collapse their existing control mechanism. They don't want us going back to a system that might be somewhat freer. So they're trying to implement their digital control agenda. I think they ran with COVID before they were ready to run with it, hoping that the vaccines would lead to the vaccine passes, would lead to the digital ID. It hasn't worked, and they're flapping about thinking, well, what do we do next? Do we have another pandemic? Do we fall back on COVID? Do we try the climate change?
Do we crash the economy?
Yeah. I mean, it's not the economy; it's the monetary system. It's money. Money is dying. That's their problem. Yeah. Their money is dying.
There are those that argue, of course, that the middle classes are traditionally an obstacle to government punching above its weight, throwing its weight around. Government controls. The middle class stand as a slightly better resourced, slightly better educated sector of society to mount a credible resistance to government. There are those that say that the middle classes are the plan, you could say. Obviously we don't know exactly what the plan is, but certainly we can infer from published agendas and so forth to remove the middle class, and obviously trumped up energy crises and all of these sorts of things can be used to this end. Do you think there's any truth in that?
Yeah, in some truth, I'd probably not use the class categorization, because I think that's sort of 19th century and unhelpful. I think what they don't like is people that are financially independent of the state, which you might say. So they don't like anybody having savings. They don't like people, I think, independent sources of income, which, if you look at the businesses that were the most harshly affected by the pandemic, it's all, it's the small self-employed people,
There you go.
they're just as the gyms, all the rest of it. They don't like people that are able to make an income outside of state control. They want everybody either a state employee, an employee of a large corporation that effectively is part of the state anyway, because it's funded by the state, or on benefits. They want everybody in one of those three camps. And, you can see it in our membership and our leadership and Freedom Alliance, and in the wider freedom movement. It is heavily dominated by self-employed people. Because those people, it's not because self-employed necessarily get it any better. I mean, I know lots of salaried people that do get it, but they say, I just can't, I can't say what I think, I'll be sacked.
Yeah.
Whereas, I'm sorry, I run my own acupuncture business. I can to some extent say what I think and take that chance. So, if you look at our leadership and Freedom Alliance, it's virtually all
relatively independent people.
Yeah, and that's what they don't like. So I would avoid middle working class, because I just don't think that's an accurate sort of description of how society is these days. But financial independence, and then after that, then it's societal independence. They're going after the family, because that's a source of independence, isn't it? Parents teach their things that maybe not what the state wants them to be taught. So let's go and attack the family, which is where all the transgenderism and etc. comes in. Because they want to destabilize the family unit. So it's everything that gives anyone a source of independence from the state is under attack.
So I noticed on your manifesto, obviously your manifesto is something of a work in progress, it's only painting broad strokes for the reasons we've already discussed. But you do mention in there that you would support a wide range of currencies. So can I infer there that you would stand for a free market in money, essentially?
Yes, I would. And there's some confusion on this. I mean, this actually already exists. I mean, as I say, I'm an acupuncturist. If you come to me for acupuncture, and we agree you're going to pay me in chicken eggs or silver coins or whatever, that's perfectly legal and lawful. We can do that. There's no prohibition on that under the current system. The catch and the complication is that then creates a tax liability for me, and it may even create a tax benefit for you, and that tax liability has to be settled in pounds. So that's where they get you. It's you can trade in whatever you want, but when you come to pay your corporation tax, your income tax, your VAT, whatever, you have to pay it in pounds. And that's the key thing we have to get. If we transact, if I run my business in silver coins, then I'm entitled to pay the government my tax in silver coins. You get into the wider debate about whether there should be any tax at all, or whether it should be entirely voluntary or whatever. But to the extent that there is a taxation system, the government should accept payment in whatever the original transaction was in, and not insist on you turning it back into sterling. And that's the absolute catch at the heart of the system, the way that you have to settle your tax liabilities in pounds.
Fair play, yeah. Again, obviously, once again, there are probably a great number of your supporters that aren't great fans of taxation, spotting the obvious contradiction with the non-coercion principle, if we take that right down to the root. But let's not split hairs there, because we are agreeing that this is a very worthy cause.
Well, we can get into it. I mean, to me, tax is just a money laundering system. It's recycling debt that the government's produced in the first place, and gives the illusion of people paying for public services when they're not. I'm signed up to the concept of ever smaller government. So we've got a government now that costs us 900 billion a year or whatever. So maybe next year it costs 850 billion, and the year after it costs 800 billion. And as you reduce the size of it, the tax burden reduces. So that's where I'm at. I think the concept of ever smaller government and and ever more local government as well. I would like to see much stronger parish and town councils, and much less going on in London.
Do you think there's a will for people to participate in government, or do you think that they're so sort of I don't know, either sort of feel so disempowered, shall we say? Are people sort of throwing their hands up, or do you think that there's enough of a ground roots feeling of capability to get involved in local government? Because generally people seem to be fairly sort of resigned and detached from their fate, don't they? It's sort of all in the hands of those at Westminster, and there's not much we can do, you could say, would summarize most people's thinking. Do you think there's enough sort of functionality on the ground to really run things from grassroots level?
Yes and no would be my answer to that. So I think in terms of the freedom movement, I think there is. I mean, I'm going to these town hall meetings, speaking at them up and down the country now. we're getting 50 to 100 people turning up and listening to me, and I'm not that exciting to listen to. Speaking often quite small towns, I'm doing one in Bakewell in Derbyshire in a couple of weeks' time, and one in Bangor in North Wales. So I'm going to these small towns, and 100 people are turning up to listen to me talk about. And the mainstream parties can't get those sort of numbers out. The Labour Party, Tory Party can't get those sort of numbers coming to branch meetings.
Yeah, that's
so
great.
So the freedom movement, I think, has got the networks, has got the capacities, has got the energy. In terms of the wider population, I've always thought they wake up and get excited when it gets horrendous. And I thought from the start there were two things possibly that would, I could be wrong, I'm only guessing two things that would wake them up. One would be that it became obvious that the vaccines were killing and harming people, and it became impossible for them to keep that out of the mainstream media. And the second would be the hyperinflationary collapse. Life would become so expensive that people say, "What the hell is going on now? We've had enough of this system." And both of those, to me, seem like they're almost there, but not quite there, really.
Yes.
But when life ceases to be uncomfortable, when people wake up to the fact that the government has been trying to harm them, or wake up to how the monetary system works, then I think they will get excited enough to do something about it.
There are definitely those saying that there are, unusually high numbers of deaths occurring at the moment, but I guess that's something that's very difficult to really pin down. On the subject of health, and again on general principles, and once again I emphasise, I realise that the party isn't set in stone and it's not seeking government. But one of the things I noticed in your health policy. Something to do with everybody would be encouraged to take out some kind of health insurance or choose a health insurance package from a number of causes. And I was just curious then because that was labelled as compulsory, and I was wondering whether you'd considered the alternative where you have a complete free market in health that puts the onus on the individual to take responsibility for health, because it's been argued that one of the fundamental failings of a healthcare service is it tends to encourage people to relax into safe hands and therefore not take care of themselves. You could say, there's no need for me to avoid this disease because I can go to the hospital and it'll be sorted. So do you see a contradiction there, given that we're fighting, the virus pandemic paradigm, and inherently or implicitly in there is the idea of personal responsibility for health through lifestyle choices?
Yes, I do, and it's probably medium and long term. I work as an acupuncturist, so I'm quite familiar with the notion of people taking responsibility for their health and the way that the health service has dumbed us down to the provision of free healthcare. So I entirely get that. The problem is if you switch that off on day one, you are going to be left with 80-90% of the population that are unable to afford any form of healthcare, really. So they get diagnosed with cancer, possibly through no fault of their own, and they can't afford treatment. So I don't think you can just go from one.
That's
go
another
one to the
super
other.
tank.
So what we're looking at is, it's portable funding, really, where the government is going to pay £3,000 for your healthcare this year, so you can use that to actually, you can stick with the NHS and use the NHS, or you can take it to another provider, and those providers would obviously have different slants. Some might be fund more alternative complementary health, some might not. And we think that will sharpen up the NHS to the point of, we would leave emergency medicine as sort of nationally provided. So you have a car accident and your leg's hanging off, you go to the A&E and tax covers that.
It's interesting.
But we would, we think that taking away potentially the taking away of the funding from the NHS would sharpen them up to become back, to go back to the sort of national resource that I certainly remember as a kid, where it was something actually that was something to be proud of, and something that was a worthwhile service.
Yes.
So
I don't
think you can switch off public funding of healthcare because of where we're at. You constantly, this is not a theoretical exercise. We've constantly got to recognise that it depends how you work it out. 60-70% of the population are already, entirely dependent on the government for all of their income. As I say, if you switched off and say everybody's got to provide private healthcare, then the vast majority of the population won't be able to afford any healthcare, and people will die as a result of that. And that's not a theoretical exercise, and that's not particularly something I want to be associated with. So again, it's turning around the super tanker and just the state healthcare has been getting ever bigger every year for the last 40 or 50 years or whatever. Now we're going to start to make it slightly smaller each year, and this
Yeah.
is how we're going to do it. And ultimately, the final aim may be that everybody takes full responsibility. But you will only get to that when you've got a better income distribution, won't you? Where people,
It's interesting because I mean I like the idea that you don't have to sort of force everyone to do the right thing, as long as those who want to do the right thing are allowed to and potentially encouraged. And I like that component of your policy, whereby if you opted out of the NHS, you could potentially have back your personal share of the NHS budget to fund your own healthcare.
it's got, in the first instance, it's got to be to fund your own healthcare.
Yeah,
You can't
absolutely.
have it back to buy a car.
No, absolutely.
And then go running to the NHS when you've got some
But
horrendous problem.
supposing your plan of healthcare was self-education, your lifestyle was impeccably healthy and in line with the requirements of the human body, would you not be rewarded with effectively a tax rebate? I mean, that was where I was hoping that was going.
It's again, it's medium long term. Yeah, in time you might find that your insurance premiums were lower, and possibly that was refunded to you. But again, I know from my work as an acupuncturist, it's important to take care of your own health. It is. I mean, I haven't been in a GP surgery for a long time, but people do get visited with horrendous things out of the blue when they have ticked all the right boxes, they've lived the right lifestyle, and all the rest of it. And we can argue about what the right lifestyle is, because I think there's a lot of misinformation goes on there as well. I mean,
But again, the important
people that drink live longer than people that don't drink, etc. There's quite a lot of misinformation tied up in. For me, salt is absolutely essential for health, but it's been a total war on salt and sodium for so long. So the definition of exactly what doing the right things is needs debating anyway. But I see people in my clinic who have done the right things, lived the right lifestyle, but still ended up with cancer in their 40s.
Yes, indeed. I mean, the general principle that I think that I'm trying to identify, and I think is very key, is that rather than sort of legislating and coercing everybody to do the right thing, as long as the door is open for those who want to, and this is you could translate this idea across to those who would advocate no government, and of course the idea it would be preposterous, as you say, with so many people dependent on government, to abolish it tomorrow. That would be silly. But it could be perfectly legitimate to allow individuals, groups, or any the individual, let's say, to opt out. So for example, if you wanted to just go and buy a piece of land somewhere and sort your own self out and create a sustaining farm and opt out of any government services, this what I'm illustrating is the principle of allowing people to do something outside of the coercive system.
I'm a libertarian and we're a freedom party, so we're open to that. But there is still, suppose you go and buy your piece of land and you decide that you're going to build some sort of skyscraper on it, which is going to damage the environment for the neighbours. Do those neighbours not have a right to have some sort of pushback against that and say, hang on a minute, that thing looks awful, and why are you building a skyscraper in that field?
Well, in that example, it sounds very persuasive, but we have to be careful of the fundamental principle that we're upholding, because either we're free or we're not. And people often misconstrue the planning system as safeguarding the view, whilst forgetting that, of course, that it only existed since 1948, and that the British countryside evolved without a planning system. So I don't personally, I don't personally buy that argument about the skyscraper. If everybody was allowed to buy their own field and do their own thing, you'd suddenly find that skyscrapers wouldn't exist anymore, because nobody would build them, because they're ugly and nobody wants to live in them. If they could go and live in a nice farm somewhere, why would you live in a skyscraper? So we have to be careful, I think, with those kind of analogies. But maybe we're sort of wandering into a deeper discussion on the philosophy of freedom. But I'm undisguisedly on the side for laissez-faire. I'd have to say.
Don't get me wrong, I am as well. But I do, we do have to do some things collectively. I mean, I think we can go into the debate or not, but we can't have
Yeah.
everybody running their own sewage system, can we? We have to, sort of do that together in a collective function and decide how we're going to operate it and how we're going to pay for it. There are some things that just do work better if we work together as a society, because we are fundamentally social animals.
So, Jonathan, looking forward, then, are there any elections on the horizon? Do you have any immediate goals and aims that you can share with us?
Well, yeah, I mean, the one we're focused on at the minute is the Chester by-election. So if anybody wants to come and help us campaign in Chester, just contact us at info@Freedom Alliance. Beyond that, we're obviously very focused on the next general election, whenever that is going to be, and we clearly don't know when it's going to be, but we're building up. I mean, a lot of this comes down to funding as well. We need members to help us fund, because elections aren't cheap. But at the minute we've got a list of about 25, 30 priority candidates who we definitely will run with if an election, if I switch this off and find that an election's been called, we will run with those 25, 30 candidates. We've got about another 70 who would stand if we could get the funding in place for them, and we're very focused on that. And personally, I would love there to be some sort of freedom candidate in every single constituency across the country, and that probably wouldn't be a Freedom Alliance candidate, because the thought of running 600 elections gives me sleepless nights, quite literally.
And what's the cost? Did you mention it's about five? I think I've read somewhere on your website about £5,000.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. The basic cost is you've got to put up 500 quid for a deposit, which you get back if you get 5% of the vote, and you need to do the Royal Mail leaflet. Royal Mail distribute a free leaflet. You've got to pay to print the leaflet, but they distribute it for free to everybody in the constituency, which comes in at about 600 quid. So the basic cost is not much over £1,000. You can then get into sophisticated, doing extra leaflets, campaigning. I mean, people are as important as money when you get beyond that, because you need a campaign team to go leafleting, to go knocking on doors, to do the street stalls and stuff. And money won't buy that. It's people is what you need.
Yeah.
Other parties get into sophisticated sort of targeting of voters and trying to work out who's postal voters and stuff, and that gets quite expensive. We don't do that and haven't done that and probably won't. So no, I mean, the basic cost is about £1,000 a constituency.
Yeah.
At the moment, yeah.
So, bearing that in mind, I mean, I noticed one of your policies would be to ban all donations, political donations over £10,000.
Yes.
Now, given that the Freedom Alliance is a strategic operation, shall we say, operating within the constraints of an imperfect political system, do you not think that might be something of an own goal, shooting yourselves in the foot? If there were, I mean, is that an important issue? It could block funding if a wealthy philanthropist was keen to fund freedom. Just a thought.
Well, I mean, two things. I mean, that's the manifesto is what we would do should we be in government. So we would ban it for all parties at that point. So we would have to adhere to that ban, but so would everybody else. And I think that would actually unlock politics. I mean, you've got Reclaim, for example, who've had 8 million of funding from one individual. I mean, that's potentially, he may be honest and genuine and bona fide. I don't know, but I mean, there's obvious dangers in that sort of model. So the manifesto is, if we were in government, this is what we would do. We would ban large donations for all parties, and we would, as a party, adhere to that. We're not in government, and so we run within the current system, which is you can accept large donations, and obviously we would, because it would enable us to do more.
Yeah.
I would still be. I mean, I would never want us funded by one person. My model was to get 10 or 20,000 members paying the basic membership of 20 quid each, and that would be enough to fund us. And I would still like that to be how we operate, that the members essentially pay for us. We maybe get the odd significant donation here and there to help us along the way, but I would be uncomfortable with us being a party that was heavily funded by one or two people.
Fair play. So how many candidates do you think realistically you guys might be able to put up?
For general election, it's the funding, to be honest. I think I could, I mean, as I say, I could give you 100 names now of people who would stand for us in a general election. And I think we will get that up to 200 to 300. I mean, we've got people coming in all the time now saying, I'll be a candidate, I'll be a candidate, I'll be a candidate. So yeah, 200 to 300 would not be a problem, I don't think. You need the infrastructure to support and manage those, but you need that £1,000 for each of them. That's the big challenge for us at the moment.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, it sounds very exciting, and personally, I support you, and wish you all the best. Did you want to sort of wrap up with any closing statement of
Yeah,
appealing to the general public, or a rallying cry, or any information that you'd like to share with us
well,
in closing?
yeah, I mean, you've obviously had a good look at our website and our manifesto. I mean, everything about us is on our website at freedomalliance.co.uk. We're on all the social media channels, but we're heavily restricted. So your best bet is to go to source, to go to the website. We're constantly updating, constantly posting stuff. Yeah, I mean, I'm not a politician. I don't like the current representative democratic system, but it's one of the few things we've got. So come on board and help us use it. Basically, would
Yeah.
be my yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I'd echo that. I applaud the Freedom Alliance as being something on a playing field where there's nothing else, and it's a great first step. It's entering the political fray to get the message out. Potentially, some people who might otherwise not hear the message might hear it this way. So, I mean, every and all channels, I think, are worthy of support. So, thank you so much, Jonathon, for coming on and giving us your view, your background, telling us about the party and its goals and so forth. Check out the website, freedomalliance.co.uk. Find out all about them there. And did you say the Chesterfield by-election? Is that the next?
Chester, not
Chester.
Chesterfield. Chester, yes. First of
Okay.
first of December. So we'll be campaigning through November. Just get in touch if you want to help us, or if you're interested in being a candidate anywhere else, then get in touch.
Wonderful.
Please.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for joining me today, Jonathon. And I do urge you all to get interested in freedom. And here's an opportunity to take it into the political realm. Thank you for listening.
Thanks.